At a $20,000 a plate charity gala, a socialite's racist demand echoed through the ballroom. Fire him back to whatever kitchen he came from. But as the chef calmly removed his apron, the room discovered his power was far greater than his uniform suggested. That chef was Marcus Thorne, a culinary genius whose ascent from food truck to fine dining was legend. The couple, Charles and Eliza Winthrop, were pillars of the charity circuit, used to their every whim being law. But that night, their entitlement would collide with a simple, explosive truth. You cannot fire the man who owns the room. This is the story of a single moment that exposed the fragile hierarchy of an entire world. And the revenge served not cold, but in front of 300 stunned witnesses. Marcus Thorne's empire was born not in a gleaming kitchen, but in a refurbished taco truck called Soul and Smoke. Every night for 3 years, he served birria tacos and grits until 3 a.m. outside the city's financial district, saving every dollar, studying every review, and building a loyal following of chefs, critics, and night shift workers who recognized genius when they tasted it. His breakthrough came not from an investor, but from a fire. A grease fire in his truck's kitchen one rainy November night caused $15,000 in damage, an amount that would have bankrupted him. But that night, a line of 50 regulars, bankers, line cooks, students formed in the rain, passing a literal hat to fund the repairs. They raised $18,000 in cash by morning. That moment taught Marcus two things: the power of community and the precise value of his dream. Within 5 years, he owned Ember, a modern Southern restaurant that earned a coveted Michelin star, a rarity for any chef, but a historic first for a Black-owned restaurant in the city. Ember was followed by the Granary, an event space and catering arm that quickly became the most sought-after and discreet vendor for the city's elite. Marcus mastered a delicate balance. His food was innovative and celebrated, while his public persona remained deliberately in the background. He preferred the kitchen's heat to the spotlight's glare. Charles and Eliza Winthrop moved in a world fueled by different kinds of capital, old money, social connections, and the unshakable belief that their name opened doors that should remain closed to others. Charles's fortune, inherited from a grandfather who'd made his wealth in manufacturing, was now managed by a team of bankers. Eliza's power was social, curating her family's legacy through the Winthrop Foundation, which hosted the annual Starlight Gala, the city's most exclusive charity fundraiser. The gala was less about philanthropy and more about social cartography. Who sat at the head table, which corporation bought the most expensive table, which chef was awarded the contract. These were carefully calibrated signals in a silent war of status. For the last decade, the catering had been handled by the staid, traditional La Maison Blanche. Their food was unobjectionable and expensive, a perfect mirror for the attendees. But this year, Eliza wanted a statement. She wanted to be seen as a modernizer, a patron of the new guard. After tasting a canapé at a rival's wedding catered by the Granary, she demanded her board hire Marcus Thorne's team. The board was skeptical. The Granary was known to be selective, even turning down clients. And Thorne himself was an unknown quantity in their insulated world. But Eliza insisted. She got Marcus on the phone herself. Marcus normally avoided these events. The politics bored him. But the Winthrop Foundation, for all its pretense, did fund a pediatric cancer wing at the city hospital. The cause was real. Against his better judgment, and after negotiating a fee that made his accountant blanch, he agreed. However, he included a clause in the contract, one his lawyer insisted on. The client shall not interfere with, harass, or publicly disparage the service staff or culinary team. Breach of this constitutes immediate grounds for contract termination without refund. The gala night arrived. The venue, the historic Riverfront Hall, was draped in white orchids and crystal. 300 guests in black tie and gowns sipped champagne worth more than most monthly rents. In the sprawling stainless steel kitchen, Marcus was everywhere. He had chosen to work the pass himself, a decision that puzzled his sous chef. For an owner, this was beneath his station. But Marcus had a feeling. He wanted to control the pulse of the night. The first course, a smoked trout roulette with pickled mustard seed and caviar, went out to applause. The second course, a delicate squash velouté, was met with satisfied murmurs. The problem arose with the main, a coffee-rubbed venison loin with sweet potato confit and a blackberry gastrique. It was bold, deeply spiced, a dish that demanded attention. At table 1, the Winthrops' table, Eliza cut into her venison. She took one bite, then another, her perfectly composed face tightening. She leaned over to Charles, her whisper sharp enough to cut glass. "It's over-seasoned, it's ethnic, it's not what we paid for." Charles, who had been discussing a merger, patted her hand absent-mindedly, but Eliza's displeasure was a fire that needed fuel. She signaled a passing server, a young man named Ben. "Fetch the chef, now." Ben, trained by Marcus to handle all client feedback directly with him, nodded and hurried to the kitchen. When Marcus received the summons, he wiped his hands on a side towel. He could have sent his head chef, but something in the server's nervous eyes told him to go himself. He walked into the opulent hall, his white chef's jacket a stark contrast to the sea of black and silk. He approached table 1 with a neutral, professional demeanor. "Mrs. Winthrop, Mr. Winthrop, is everything with the course to your liking?" Eliza did not look up from her plate. "Frankly, no. The venison is unpalatable. It's far too spicy, and this sauce is overwhelming. Did you not test this menu for a refined palate?" Marcus remained still. "The dish is intended to be robust. The coffee and chili rub is a signature. If it's not to your taste, I can personally prepare you the alternative vegetarian option immediately." Charles Winthrop finally looked up, sensing a scene. "Just bring us something else, chef. Something simple. A fillet, perhaps plain." "Of course," Marcus said, his voice even. "It will be 10 minutes." As he turned to leave, Eliza's voice rose, clear and carrying to neighboring tables. "This is why we should have stuck with a proper caterer. This is what happens when you try to elevate someone beyond their station." Marcus stopped. He turned back slowly. The kitchen hum faded. The clink of silverware at nearby tables softened as ears tuned in. "Excuse me," Marcus asked, his tone dangerously calm. Eliza Winthrop looked him directly in the eye, the charity matron mask gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated contempt. "You heard me. The service has been slow, the food is garish, and frankly, your entire team is out of its depth. I want you to leave, now, and take your staff with you. I'll have someone competent finish this. You're fired." A wave of whispers rippled out from the table. Charles placed a hand on her arm. "Eliza, not here." She shook him off. "No, Charles, we are paying a fortune for this circus." She turned her gaze back to Marcus, who had not moved a muscle. "Consider your contract terminated. I'll have security escort you out. You can go back to whatever kitchen you came from." The ballroom was utterly silent now. 300 people held their breath. Every eye was fixed on the chef in the white jacket, standing before the city's most powerful couple, being treated like a disobedient servant. Marcus Thorne let the words hang in the air. He let the cruel echo of "whatever kitchen you came from" settle over the stunned room. Then he reached up, his movements deliberate and slow, and untied the apron strings around his waist. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved. He pulled the apron over his head, revealing a tailored charcoal suit jacket beneath the open chef's coat. He folded the white apron neatly, placed it on the edge of the Winthrops' table, and finally spoke, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent hall. "Mrs. Winthrop," he said, each word precise, "you cannot fire me and you cannot fire my team." He paused, letting the confusion show on her face. "Because you do not employ us. You are a client of the granary which I own, but more importantly tonight," he turned slightly, gesturing to the magnificent room around them, "you are a guest in Riverfront Hall." He let that sink in. Charles Winthrop's face went pale. "Which," Marcus finished, the half-smile finally touching his lips, "I also own. The contract you just breached gives me sole discretion to terminate this event for host misconduct. and I'm exercising that clause now." Eliza Winthrop's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The 300 guests were statues. Marcus raised his voice, addressing the entire ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Winthrop Foundation Starlight Gala is concluded. On behalf of Riverfront Hall and the Granary, we apologize for the interruption. Security will assist with your orderly departure. The bars are closed. The kitchens are closed." He then looked down at the horrified couple, his final words for them alone, yet audible in the perfect silence. "Your check for the full amount will be due in 30 days, and I can assure you, you will never book a venue or a caterer in this city again. Good night." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, not as a dismissed employee, but as a king returning to his domain, leaving a dynasty's reputation in ruins behind him. The stunned silence held for a full 3 seconds before erupting into a chaos of gasps, exclamations, and the frantic scraping of chairs. In the kitchen, his staff stood frozen, having heard everything over the service intercom. Marcus went straight to the pass, picked up the house phone, and dialed security. "This is Thorne. The event in the grand ballroom is terminated. Send a full team to facilitate guest departure. Immediately." He hung up, looked at his wide-eyed team, and gave a single, sharp nod. "Service is over," he said. "Start breaking down, and someone pack up the Winthrop's personal wine stash from the green room. They paid for it. They can take it with them." Outside the kitchen doors, the orderly world of high society was devolving into pandemonium. But how did Marcus Thorne, the taco truck chef, come to own the most prestigious venue in the city without the people who used it ever knowing? And what happens when the most powerful couple in town finds themselves powerless, humiliated, and exposed in front of everyone who matters? The gala was over, but the real battle was just beginning. In the chaotic exodus from Riverfront Hall, smartphones were more valuable than jewelry. Videos shot on shaky hands, voices hushed with shock, captured the entire confrontation. By the time the last limo pulled away, the footage was already stitching itself into a narrative that would bypass society pages and land squarely on the front page of the internet. Charles Winthrop's first call from the back of his town car was not to his lawyer, but to his public relations firm, Barrington and Sage. His instructions were frantic. "Kill the story. Contain it. I don't care what it costs." But the digital genie was already out of the bottle. The videos had no single source. They erupted from 300 different phones simultaneously. One clip, focusing on Eliza's snarling, "Whatever kitchen you came from," was viewed 500,000 times in the first hour alone. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was in his office above the kitchen, the quiet punctuated only by the hum of industrial dishwashers below. His phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from reporters, texts from concerned friends, and a flood of supportive DMs from fellow chefs and former food truck customers. He ignored them all, instead placing 2 deliberate calls. The first was to his legal team, confirming the ironclad nature of the termination clause. The second was to the board of the city's culinary union, of which he was a quiet but influential member. His message was simple. The Winthrop Foundation is now a hostile entity to hospitality workers. Share that discretionarily. By midnight, the story had metastasized. It was no longer just a viral clip. It was a cultural Rorschach test. Food blogs dissected the venison recipe, declaring it a masterpiece. Business magazines ran profiles of Marcus's secretive acquisition of Riverfront Hall 2 years prior, a purchase made through a blind trust, explaining why the Winthrops never knew. Social justice commentators framed the incident as a textbook case of the casual racism embedded in old money philanthropy. Eliza Winthrop, watching this unfold from her limestone mansion, made her fatal error. She dictated a statement to the Barrington and Sage team, who pleaded with her to issue a simple apology. She refused. The statement, released at 1:17 a.m., read, "The Winthrop Foundation is deeply disappointed by the unprofessional conduct and abrupt contract violation by a vendor at tonight's gala. While emotions ran high, our commitment to our charitable mission remains unwavering. We will be pursuing all legal remedies. The word vendor was a spark in a room full of gunpowder. The chef community, already incensed, erupted. Michelin-starred chefs, line cooks, and food critics alike took to social media, not just in support of Marcus, but in condemnation of the term vendor used to diminish a craftsman. The headline that stuck came from the city's leading food critic. They didn't just insult a man, they insulted the art. The next morning, the institutional consequences began to crystallize. Three major corporate sponsors of the Winthrop Foundation called an emergency meeting. Their brands, built on inclusivity, could not be associated with the scandal. A board member of the hospital's pediatric wing, the very charity the gala benefited, gave a private interview stating, "The foundation's actions have created a toxic association with our work. We are reviewing the future of their funding." Charles Winthrop's world was financial, and it began to shudder. At 10 a.m., his broker called. The stock of his family's legacy manufacturing company, Winthrop Consolidated, had dipped 3% in pre-market trading. The ticker symbol WCON was now being mentioned alongside the hashtag Boycott Winthrop on financial blogs. The dip was small, but in the world of perception, it was a tremor warning of an earthquake. But the true pivot, the reframing of the entire conflict, came from an unexpected source: the past. A former sous chef from La Maison Blanche, the caterer the Winthrops used for a decade, reached out to a journalist. She provided emails and internal memos detailing a pattern of behavior from Eliza Winthrop that had been carefully buried for years. Complaints about staff being too ethnic, last-minute demands for white glove service only, and most damningly, a withheld final payment to a black event planner in 2016 after she objected to being called the help. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The story shifted from a chef's revenge to the Winthrop pattern. The narrative was no longer about one spoiled meal, but about a system of entitled abuse, with Eliza Winthrop as its consistent architect. Marcus, however, was facing his own unforeseen consequence. While the public saw a victorious king, his internal world was one of cold calculation. He gathered his core management team. "They will come at us legally, financially, and socially," he told them. "They will try to paint us as difficult, as divas. They will lean on every connection they have to blacklist us from other events, from liquor licenses, from anything they can touch." His team expected a defiant speech. Instead, they got a strategy. "We operate with absolute, unimpeachable professionalism. Every invoice, every permit, every contract will be perfect. And we open our books to any journalist who asks. We have nothing to hide." They do. The Winthrops' legal team, a formidable firm named Crestwood Legal, filed their first motion by noon. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. It alleged fraudulent misrepresentation by the granary claiming Marcus had concealed his ownership of the venue to secure the contract, and gross negligence in the preparation of the food. They sought not only to nullify the final invoice, but to sue for damages to the foundation's reputation. The motion was accompanied by a sleek, 30-page document filled with technical jargon. It was designed to overwhelm, to drag the fight into a swamp of depositions where money and patience would decide the winner. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp litigator named Anya Sharma who specialized in protecting creative businesses, read the motion and smiled. "They've made a classic mistake," she told Marcus. "They're arguing about the food. They're arguing about the contract. They are not arguing about what 300 people heard her say. They've conceded the battlefield." Her counterfiling was concise. It focused on one single clause, the host misconduct termination trigger. It included affidavits from 5 guests who heard Eliza's demand, and it attached the viral video as Exhibit A. It asked the court for a summary judgment to dismiss the Winthrop case and to compel immediate payment of the outstanding invoice. It was a legal spear aimed at the heart of their strategy. The public battle, however, was being waged online. The Winthrop PR team, desperate to change the narrative, began a whisper campaign. Anonymous sources began feeding stories to gossip columnists, tales of Marcus Thorne being difficult to work with, of volatile behavior in his kitchens. The subtext was clear. He was an angry black man who finally snapped. This backfired catastrophically. Dozens of past and present employees of the granary and Ember began posting their own testimonials with the hashtag #AWorkWithMarcus. They shared stories of tuition assistance, of emergency loans during the pandemic, of Marcus's famous family meal where he cooked for his staff every Sunday. The portrait that emerged was the precise opposite of the whisper campaign. It showed a leader, not a tyrant. Then, the bridge to the next level of escalation appeared. It came in the form of a sealed envelope delivered by courier to Marcus's office. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of a decades-old article from the society section of a newspaper. It showed a much younger Charles Winthrop at a debutante ball. Standing at the edge of the photo, serving champagne, was a young, smiling black woman in a server's uniform. A handwritten note on the paper in elegant script read, "Her name was Clara. She was my mother. She worked for his family for 30 years. Ask him what happened when she asked for a raise to pay for her son's asthma medication. A friend." Note changed everything. This was no longer just about a gala. It was about inheritance. It was about a son of a servant facing down the son of a master in a hall their mothers had once cleaned. Marcus held the paper, the weight of a hidden history settling onto his shoulders. The private, anonymous ally who sent this had handed him not just ammunition, but a responsibility. Using it would mean dragging a stranger's painful history into the light. Not using it might mean losing the war. As he stared at the photograph, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered. A calm, older woman's voice spoke. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Clara Jenkins. I believe you have a photograph of me." The line was silent for a moment. "I think it's time we talked, but you should know the Winthrops aren't just coming for your business anymore. Charles's brother sits on the zoning board. They've just filed a complaint about noise and traffic violations at Riverfront Hall. They're coming for your home." Clara Jenkins's voice carried the quiet steadiness of someone who had survived storms that would shatter granite. She agreed to meet Marcus, but not at his office or her home. She chose a public park bench halfway between their two worlds, a neutral ground for a conversation 60 years in the making. She was there first, a small, elegant woman in her late 70s, hands folded in her lap, watching the pigeons. Marcus sat beside her, the old newspaper photo in a protective sleeve between them. "Thank you for calling," he said. "I've been waiting for someone to ask about that photo for a very long time," she began, her eyes not leaving the birds. "I worked for the Winthrop family from the time I was 18 until I was 48. I raised Charles and his brother, Robert, more than their mother did. I made their meals, bandaged their knees, listened to their dreams." She turned to him then, her gaze clear and direct. "When my boy Samuel was diagnosed with severe asthma, the medicine was expensive. I asked old Mr. Winthrop, Charles's grandfather, for a modest raise. He told me I was replaceable. The next day, my hours were cut. A month later, I was let go for budgetary reasons. No pension, no reference. Samuel's health suffered. We lost our apartment." Marcus felt the story like a physical weight. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Jenkins." "Clara, please," she patted his hand. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand the pattern. It's not about anger. It's about a system. They believe the world exists in tiers and some people are permanently assigned to the bottom one. You stepped out of your assigned tier. That to them is the greatest sin." She reached into her bag and produced a thin, leather-bound ledger. "I kept records. Every slight, every deduction from my pay, every promise broken. I didn't know why for years. I just knew I should." She handed it to him. "My friend who sent you the photo works in the city archives. She found something else. The original deed to the land Riverfront Hall sits on. There was a covenant, a forgotten clause about nuisance abatement that gives the zoning board extraordinary power if a neighbor complains. Charles's brother, Robert, just became chair of that board. They aren't just filing a complaint. They're laying the groundwork to have your venue's permit revoked entirely. The chessboard had just expanded. The legal fight over a catering contract was a skirmish. This was an existential threat to the physical pillar of his empire. Marcus's mind raced. How do we fight a city board? With a bigger story, Clara said simply. You can't win a whisper fight against power. You have to turn on all the lights. Marcus took her ledger and her advice. He returned to his legal team, but with a new directive. Anya Sharma, his lawyer, reviewed the zoning complaint. It was clever, citing noise ordinances from events that happened before Marcus even owned the hall. This is a pure power play, Anya confirmed. They want to force you into a settlement, drop your invoice, issue a public apology, and they make the complaint disappear. Meanwhile, the whisper campaign against Marcus intensified. A food critic who had once panned Ember suddenly published a retroactive piece questioning Marcus's authenticity. A former dishwasher, paid handsomely by a tabloid, gave a fabricated interview about toxic kitchen culture. The Winthrop strategy was now clear: drown the original sin in a mudslide of other allegations. Marcus's countermove was to stop playing defense. He authorized Anya to file a separate, bold lawsuit, a civil suit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, naming not just the foundation, but Charles and Eliza Winthrop personally. The lawsuit included Clara's ledger as evidence of a historical pattern of exploitative and discriminatory conduct, linking the past to the present. It was a nuclear option, making the case irretrievably personal and public. The media, which had been feasting on the scandal, now had a second full-course meal. Court battle escalates. Chef sues SOCILITES personally. The business sections picked apart the potential financial liability. The society pages dissected the implosion of a dynasty. Then came the wait, it gets worse moment for the Winthrops. It arrived from within their own fortress. The anonymous ally in the archives, Clara's friend, delivered another document. This one was a financial record from the Winthrop Foundation itself, leaked from a disgruntled junior accountant. It showed that for the past 3 years, a staggering 40% of the funds raised at the Starlight Gala had been siphoned off to cover administrative costs and consulting fees, the largest of which was paid to a firm owned by Charles Winthrop's cousin. The charity was, in part, a shell game. The pediatric cancer wing received funding, but far less than the gala's promos claimed. The narrative shattered again. This was no longer a story about rude rich people and a proud chef. This was a story about fraudulent charity and the theft of hope from sick children. When the city's leading investigative newspaper broke that story, the ground gave way entirely. The district attorney's office announced an investigation into the foundation's finances. The hospital severed all ties and returned the previous year's donation. Corporate sponsors not only pulled out, they demanded their past donations be returned. Charles Winthrop was now facing legal threats on 4 fronts: Marcus's lawsuit, the DA's investigation, shareholder lawsuits from WCON's dipping stock, and the collapse of his family's philanthropic legacy. The pressure cracked the marriage. Reports emerged of furious shouting behind the mansion's closed doors, of Eliza fleeing to a wellness retreat in Switzerland, leaving Charles to face the fire alone. But a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. Charles, through his brother Robert on the zoning board, pushed the nuisance complaint to a sudden emergency hearing. The move was blatantly corrupt, a use of government power to punish a private enemy. The hearing was set for just 48 hours later, an impossible timeline for Marcus to marshal proper defense. This was the second-order consequence Marcus feared: the insidious use of institutional levers that operate in shadowy, bureaucratic rooms, far from the court of public opinion. Losing his permit would shutter Riverfront Hall during the lucrative wedding and holiday season, bleeding millions and crippling his business regardless of the outcome in civil court. Marcus's team worked through the night. Anya prepared legal arguments to delay or dismiss the hearing. His PR team prepared a statement condemning the abuse of power, but it felt like trying to stop a bulldozer with paperwork. It was Clara Jenkins who provided the final, crucial piece. "They think their name is a key that opens every door," she told Marcus over the phone. "But there's one door it can't open, the truth. You need to get to that hearing, and you need to bring the cameras with you." On the morning of the hearing, a nondescript conference room in the city municipal building was prepared for a dry, technical proceeding. But when Marcus Thorne arrived, he was not alone. Walking beside him, arm in arm, was Clara Jenkins, and behind them, a phalanx of reporters and camera crews, alerted by a simple tip. The man who exposed the Winthrop Foundation's finances is having his business attacked by the Winthrop family in a closed-door hearing. Robert Winthrop, chairing the hearing, blanched as the room flooded with light and lenses. His legal counsel objected immediately, demanding the press be removed. Anya Sharma stood and said, "My client believes in transparency. This hearing, spurred by a complaint from the brother of the individual my client is suing for defamation, is a matter of profound public interest. We waive any privacy. Let the people see how their city's zoning power is being used." A procedural argument erupted, broadcast live on local news streams. Robert Winthrop, under the glaring heat of the cameras, grew flustered, his entitled arrogance morphing into panicked rigidity. He tried to cite obscure procedural rules. The footage was damning, a powerful man, visibly sweating, trying to hide a process from public view. Marcus never got to present his case that day. The spectacle was the case. By noon, 3 city council members had called for an ethics investigation into Robert Winthrop's conduct. The mayor's office issued a statement urging the zoning board to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The emergency hearing was indefinitely postponed. Charles Winthrop's last clean weapon had been snatched from his hand and broken in front of the city. The institutional warfare had backfired, exposing the corruption at its source. The Winthrops were now besieged on all sides, their power exposed as a hollow shell. But for Marcus, the victory felt incomplete. He had defended his home, but the war had revealed how deeply the roots of injustice ran. He stood on the steps of the municipal building, the autumn sun casting long shadows, Clara Jenkins beside him. He had won the battle of the Gala, the legal fight, the zoning skirmish. Yet he understood that true victory wasn't about making the Winthrops lose. It was about changing the game itself. And as he looked out at the city, he knew the final move, the move that would define his legacy, was still his to make. The world was watching. Now, what would he build from the rubble? The fallout from the zoning hearing spectacle was immediate and merciless. Robert Winthrop resigned from the board by the end of the week, citing a desire to avoid further distraction. The ethics investigation proceeded without him, its scope widening daily. But for Charles Winthrop, this was no longer a public relations crisis. It was a financial and personal implosion. The district attorney's investigation into the foundation's finances moved from inquiry to formal prosecution. Charles was charged with 3 counts of charitable fraud. His lawyers negotiated frantically, but the leaked documents were too precise, the paper trail too damning. To avoid a trial that would eviscerate what was left of the family name, Charles accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to a single felony count, was fined $2.5 million, and was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest and 1,500 hours of community service, ironically, to be served in soup kitchens. The Winthrop Foundation was dissolved, its remaining assets seized and redirected by the court to legitimate charities, including the Pediatric Cancer Wing. The Starlight Gala was erased from the social calendar, a toxic brand no corporation would touch. Eliza Winthrop filed for divorce from Switzerland. Her settlement negotiations focused solely on salvaging her personal assets from the wreckage. The limestone mansion was sold to pay legal fees. The dynasty, in the space of 6 months, had been dismantled. Marcus Thorne's civil lawsuit for defamation proceeded to a settlement conference. Charles Winthrop's legal team, their leverage gone, had one goal: avoid a public trial at all costs. In a closed-door meeting, Anya Sharma laid out Marcus's terms. The financial demand was straightforward: payment of the original Gala invoice in full, plus legal fees and damages for the defamation campaign. But the second demand was what mattered. Marcus required a public, written apology to be published in the same newspapers that had once covered the Winthrop's parties, not from the foundation, from Charles and Eliza personally. The apology letter, when it was published, was a masterpiece of stark, unadorned contrition. It admitted to deeply disrespectful and racially charged language, and a pattern of entitlement that caused profound harm. It did not ask for forgiveness. It simply stated the facts of their behavior and accepted responsibility. For the city's old guard, reading it was like watching a statue crumble in the town square. Marcus received the wire transfer for the settlement. The amount was substantial, but it was not the money that felt like victory. It was the silence that followed. The whisper campaign stopped. The anonymous sources dried up. The food critic who had attacked him published a retraction. The battle was over. But Marcus remembered his conversation with Clara Jenkins on the park bench. True victory wasn't about making them lose. It was about changing the game. With the settlement funds, he made his move. He announced the creation of the Ember Foundation, a nonprofit with a clear twofold mission. First, to provide culinary arts scholarships and apprenticeship funding for young people from underserved communities. Second, to offer zero-interest loans and business mentorship to aspiring restaurant owners of color, a direct counter to the systemic barriers he had faced. He named Clara Jenkins as the foundation's chair emeritus. Her first act was to establish the Samuel Jenkins Grant for students pursuing medical fields in memory of her son. The past was not buried. It was folded into the foundation of the future. The final surprising detail, the one that closed the loop with poetic precision, concerned Riverfront Hall itself. With the zoning complaint voided and Robert Winthrop gone, Marcus's permit was secure. He decided to transform the venue's grand ballroom, the very room where the confrontation had occurred, for one night each month. He called it the community table. On those nights, the hall was not rented out for $50,000 weddings. Instead, Marcus and his chefs from Ember prepared a magnificent multi-course meal. The guests were not socialites. They were teachers, nurses, firefighters, and families from the neighborhoods the Winthrop Foundation had once ignored. The tickets were free, distributed through community centers and local nonprofits. The only price of admission was conversation and community. The first community table dinner was held on the one-year anniversary of the Starlight Gala. Clara Jenkins sat at the head of the table. Marcus, once again in a chef's jacket, personally served the first course. The main dish was not venison. It was a braised short rib, comforting and rich, a dish meant to nourish, not to impress. The room, which had once been choked with tension and entitlement, was now filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. The legacy of that single night was no longer defined by a viral video of a takedown. It was defined by a scholarship awarded to a first-generation college student. It was defined by a loan that helped a single mother open a bakery in her neighborhood. It was defined by a ballroom that now, regularly, echoed with the sounds of a city feeding its own soul. Marcus Thorne still owns Ember, the Granary, and Riverfront Hall. He still works the pass on busy nights. The watch beneath his chef's jacket is still expensive, his suit still tailored. But the power he wields is no longer hidden, and its purpose is no longer personal. It is planted in the community that first believed in a man with a taco truck, a community he fought for, and a community he now feeds in return. The story that began with an arrogant demand to fire him back to whatever kitchen he came from ends in a kitchen of his own making, on his own terms, with the doors held wide open. The revenge was not served cold. It was transformed through the alchemy of principle and perseverance into something far more sustaining: justice, served at the perfect temperature to everyone at the table. The story of Marcus Thorne and the Winthrops is, on one level, a perfect fable of comeuppance. A powerful couple humbled, a wronged man vindicated. But to leave it there is to miss the deeper, more uncomfortable truth the saga reveals about the world we actually live in. It wasn't Marcus's ownership of the venue that was the true anomaly. It was Eliza Winthrop's unshakable belief that he couldn't possibly own it. Her outrage wasn't just about seasoning. It was about a fundamental breach in the social order as she understood it. The real shock in that ballroom was the collapse of an assumption that the person serving the food must always be beneath the person eating it. This story, while fictional, is built from very real bricks. The documented bias faced by Black chefs and hospitality workers, the astronomical barriers to ownership for minority entrepreneurs, and the quiet, daily indignities endured by those deemed to be in service roles. Marcus's victory wasn't magical. It was the product of decades of unseen struggle, saving, and strategy that people like the Winthrops never had to consider. So the lingering question isn't, could this happen? The more probing question is, how many times has a version of this happened where the person being demeaned didn't have the deed to the room in their back pocket? How many times has the insult landed, the power dynamic held, and the story ended with a demoralized walk to the back door? That's why the final image of the community table matters. It represents a conscious rewriting of the script. It's the refusal to let a space defined by exclusion remain that way. It's the decision to use hard-won power not for further isolation, but for deliberate, radical inclusion. Marcus transformed the site of his public humiliation into a place of communal celebration. In doing so, he answered the central challenge posed by any injustice, not just to stop the harm, but to build something new in the scarred place it left behind. We are drawn to stories where the underdog wins because they speak to a fundamental hope, that dignity can triumph over disregard, that integrity can outlast influence. Marcus Thorne's journey from the grill of a taco truck to the helm of a foundation reminds us that the most potent form of power isn't the kind that lords over others. It's the kind that lifts them up. If you found this story of hidden power and public reckoning compelling, make sure to subscribe. We bring you deep dives into the narratives that define our world, the hidden battles and the quiet victories that reshape our understanding of justice, power, and what it means to win. Your subscription tells us these are the stories worth telling. Thanks for watching.